Yeah, so I do want to recap last week a little bit. There's some of the same faces that were here last time, but also a couple new ones. So I will recap a little bit what we talked about. First, I introduced you to the author of The Handmaid's Tale, Margaret Atwood. Here she is. She was born in 1939. I love this picture of her because she just looks so comfortable there, and, comfortable and confident. And I talked a little bit about why The Handmaid's Tale, which was published over 30 years ago in 1985, why it has enjoyed this resurgence in popularity the past couple of years, and talked a little bit about the Women's March and a kind of greater attention in 2016, 2017 to women and women's issues, and a kind of greater energy around that in particular. And then there also being a TV adaptation of this novel that came out by Hulu. So you see an image of that over here. So that also kind of brought about a resurgence of interest in Atwood's book. We also talked a little bit about dystopian literature, and we wondered together about why dystopian books are compelling, and also, how they challenge us as people of faith and people of hope. Because one of the things we talked about with dystopias is it's a pretty bleak setting, right? Things have gone terribly wrong. Things have gone off the rails. And so what is it like for us as people who have hope and faith in the future to encounter worlds like that? And why do we read them? What value do they have for us? So we had a nice conversation, I thought, about some of those things. Today, I want to shift a little bit and talk about the form of the book. And by that, I mean how Atwood chose to write it. So the novel is narrated by a woman named Offred. And I shared with you last week, those of you who were here, a video that kind of gave a nice summary of the book and talked about her character a little bit. But her name is not actually Offred. We don't know for certain what her real name was before she became a handmaid, but all of the handmaids are assigned names. So their previous pasts are erased, and they are given names that indicate the commander, the man whose home they live in, right? And really who they work for and who they have this kind of odd relationship with. I'll talk more about in a second. So for this woman, her commander's name is Fred. So she is of Fred, right? So that is what her name is. Her name signifies the man that she is attached to, right? Through this system. So Offred. She narrates this entire book. That's why the book is called The Handmaid's Tale. It is her tale of her life. She describes her life as a handmaid, which means that she lives in the house of a male commander, as he's called. In the world that Atwood has created, the birth rate has dropped dramatically. There are very few children who are born and who survive both time in the womb as well as survive infancy. And this is a real crisis. And the handmaids, their health, their movements, and their behavior is watched very closely because they are assigned to commanders to bear children for them. That is their role. The handmaids have no choice in this. After the coup that ushered in this new form of government, which is a fundamentalist theocracy, Offred, who in her prior life had had a husband and had a child, she was separated from her family and assigned the joys of streaming Sunday school. Sometimes
it's nice to be able to take a break,
That's right. Okay. So as I was saying, so Offred was removed from her past life. She was separated from her family and then went to this training facility to learn how to become a handmaid. And what I was describing is that every kind of position in this society has an outfit that they're supposed to wear, a uniform. And so in the case of her, she has this hat on that you can see. It's kind of like a bonnet, but it restricts what she can see, right? It also restricts how people can see her. So there are these kinds of blinders. In the book, she describes them as wings. And then you see obviously the red, which for one, it signifies their position. It makes them easy to see and spot in a restrictive society where these women are not given freedom of movement. It certainly would make it difficult to escape or run away if this is the kind of outfit that you have to wear, you can imagine. And it's kind of a cloak that covers their whole body. So this was part of that kind of induction that she had into becoming a handmaid. And then she's assigned to a commander to bear children for him, if that's possible. So in the book, she describes her life in this suffocating and dangerous world. We discover at the end of the novel that these chapters are transcriptions of tape recordings that the handmaid had created. So this is her voice that she had recorded talking about her life, all the kinds of things that it has involved. So just to give you a sense of that and kind of the voice of the book, I'd like to just share the first paragraph of the novel. So I'm going to switch my screen over here and actually go into, are you seeing that opening? Okay, good. So this is just the first paragraph of The Handmaid's Tale. We slept in what had once been the gymnasium. The floor was of varnished wood with stripes and circles painted on it for the games that were formerly played there. The hoops for the basketball nets were still in place, though the nets were gone. A balcony ran around the room for the spectators, and I thought I could smell, faintly, like an afterimage, the pungent scent of sweat, shot through with the sweet taint of chewing gum and perfume from the watching girls, felt skirted as I knew from pictures, later in miniskirts, then pants, then in one earring, spiky green streaked hair. Dances would have been held there. The music lingered, a palimpsest of unheard sound, style upon style, and undercurrent of drums, a forlorn wail, garlands made of tissue paper flowers, cardboard devils, a revolving ball of mirrors, powdering the dancers with a snow of light. So the reason I wanted to share this with you is to see these, to hear her voice, right? And she uses words like we and I could smell, I thought I could smell, I knew from pictures. So she's bringing in her memories to evaluate the situation she's in now. How do I think about this place that I'm in based on what I know of what this area used to be? And that's something that persists through the whole book. So one thing that I wanted us to kind of talk about a little bit today and think through is, why are first person narratives compelling? By that, I mean, when you hear somebody tell their own story. So here she's using that word I, right? We don't have what in literature we call a third person narrator, where there's just a narrator who tells us what's happening but is on the outside. It's like that narrator is kind of watching people and describing what's happening. This is a first person narrative in which the person herself, the character herself, is telling her own story. And so what do you think about that? Why are first person narratives compelling, or in what ways can they be compelling? Maybe that kind of leads into this next question, which is, this is a first person narrative. So she's talking about her own experiences. She's also then a witness of what's happening in this society, which is called Gilead in the book. And why is being a witness important, do you think? And secondly, is it important to read the narratives of witnesses? I mentioned earlier that the kind of setup for this novel is that it's a crisis of birth rates that initiates this theocracy. And Atwood doesn't go into a lot of detail about why this has happened, but there may have been some environmental issues that came about. But regardless, people are struggling to have children, both to conceive and then also to have these children live. And so sometimes they were born with severe disabilities, or they just do not survive. So this is kind of the crisis that kicks everything off. And also is why for these women in particular, their lives are so constrained, because they're supposed to play this certain role in populating society. So it's a crisis that starts that. So this is a very theoretical, excuse me, question, but what kind of crisis, if any, do you think could cause our democracy to crumble? One of the things I described that happens in the book is that this religious fundamentalist group, they really take certain ideas of Christianity, and I would say co-opt them. It's not really a Christian regime that rules in Gilead. It doesn't look anything like what we know of Christ, but they do use certain biblical passages to support what they do. And so that's what inspires this question. If your faith institution were to be co-opted by extremists, how would you resist? How would you know that you should resist? And what should resistance look like?
Ellen, I wonder if you might real quickly, or I can do it, say some of the examples of, or an example of how they co-opt
Yeah.
faith or.
Right. Okay, so for example, the role of the handmaids. So one of the things that they do is they go back to a biblical story in the Old Testament where you have Abraham and Sarah, right? And they are not able to have a child of their own. And so Sarah, or Sarai at this point, gives to Abram her maid and says, you can have a child with her, right? And they have a child. And that's where this arrangement of having a handmaid comes from. So they say, okay, something's not working here in society, so we're going to find another person for you. And that's, so the commander has a wife, right? But they cannot have a child. And so he's given this other woman. And those are the women in the red and the helmet hats, and they live in the house. And every month there is a ritual in which they try to conceive a child. So that's one example, and that's certainly central to the book. There's also when she's describing flashbacks to her training and becoming that, there are a lot of biblical passages about submission that are used to describe why the handmaids need to submit to this kind of service to the state. So, but there's very little, and Alfred even reflects on this, none of the passages in scripture about liberation or freedom or the meek shall inherit the earth, like that's not the stuff that gets conveyed. It's more the stuff about submission of women in particular.
Why to be subject to your husbands.
Yeah, that kind of stuff.
Setup.
So, but that's, I mean, by co-opted, it's like they've taken out certain ideas, right? And then built a whole society around those, rather than thinking about it kind of holistically. And then they, in the book, the leading group, they have also stamped out any other kinds of dissenters. So kind of similar if you think back to early American history and the situations that like the Quakers found themselves in, or other Protestant groups that were seeking religious freedom in this society too. Those have been stamped out, who might dissent from this kind of thing. Does that help, Dave?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay.
So how would we know to resist? Is that?
And I think what's leading me to ask that question, how would you know that you should resist, is if somebody's using your own book of faith, right, to argue to you that certain kinds of things should be done, using your own kind of faith system and faith materials against you. Because I've asked you to speculate about rather dark things this morning, I wanted to end with a word of more hope. So this comes from John, and is more of this message of hope and a reminder that, despite all these difficulties, what Jesus says is, peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid. So whatever is ahead for us, like we have someone on our side, and someone who gives us peace and gives to us not as the world gives. So even though the world is throwing a lot at us right now, some of which we can comprehend and handle, and some of which is very difficult too. But if we can not let our hearts be troubled and not be afraid, that will help us in big ways going forward. And so thank you for allowing me to be here with you and to go into some of these kind of speculations and things. I think it's been fun, and I appreciate your participation. It's been really fun. Dear God, we thank you for this time to be together, to talk about ideas, to wonder, to speculate, but to also ultimately put our faith and trust in you. We ask that you guide us in the coming days and weeks, provide us comfort and peace when we need it. We ask for strength and resilience as a nation and a world we continue to struggle through this health crisis. We pray for those who are struggling because of financial losses, job losses, the loss of loved ones. We ask for comfort and peace and guidance. We also thank you for this church community. We ask that you bless it and that you be with us as we go from this place. Ask all these things in your son's name.